There's no question that this technique is going to help your mixes translate to the outside world in a really good way. Oh man, another session inspired by an awesome comment and question left by Pizer last week on the subject of volume dynamics. Check out what Pizer shares. Coming to recording from a live musician background, not as an engineer, so hopefully this question isn't too basic. Wondering about how to translate pretty dramatic volume dynamics in a song construction to a mix, i.e., so that quiet parts aren't too quiet, but at the same time, there's still a major impact when the beat aggressive part drops. Would love to know strategies around volume dynamics. Oh man, that is an excellent question, Pizer. Thank you so much for engaging on the channel. It's a really big deal, and that is absolutely not too simple a question. I encourage anybody to leave any kind of question on this channel because there is never a bad question, right? I mean, we've all heard this before. In fact, Pizer, coming from a live musician background, sort of gives you an edge in a lot of areas in this business. So that is an absolute asset. Having the experience of being on stage and being in a live situation can be a solid foundation when you're getting into recording, no question. Oh yeah, Pizer, that's a great question, my friend. And this is an area that used to make me half crazy, trying to deliver really dynamic mixes that would translate well to the outside world. And so for today's session, I'm going to open up a couple of tracks that will demonstrate exactly how I like to deal with volume dynamics today. And there's no question that this technique, if you follow it, will help translate your mixes in a much better way, I promise you. So let's get into it. Well, this first song is a great example of a common issue I have when I get up to mixing. And I know some of you are going to relate to this, where I simply mix too much dynamic range into that track, and it ends up coming back to haunt me. I know where this stems from. In my own experience, sitting in a perfect, pristine mixing room where you've got no noise floor and a lovely mixing environment, well, the result of that for me is often I will end up mixing way too much dynamic range into that track. For example, if I build a long, cool intro for a song, well, sitting in my perfect mixing environment, I've been guilty of putting way too much dynamic range into that intro, where it might sound really killer in my own studio, but as soon as I output that track and go listen to it somewhere else, it does not translate at all to the outside world. Well, I believe this is a common issue for a lot of different mixers, and the simple solution for me has been to come up with a sort of pre-emphasis on my master bus. I'm talking about simply automating your master. But there's a key here that's very important and something that you have to distinguish. You can't just go and do what I'm talking about on the master fader. You've got to add pre-emphasis or manipulate that master before the limiter. This is so important. I've shared in a lot of different sessions that when I mix, I don't mix straight to the master bus. I always have an intermediate kind of mix bus set up that allows me, in my case, to go out to my analog chain and come back and then get digitized. Well, that extra bus that allows me to send my whole mix out to my analog chain, that also allows me to manipulate that bus. And this is often what I get up to. Well, once again, this first example is our recent Ogre remix collab, the Lockdown mix. You can see clearly that I've added a substantial boost on the master bus right at the beginning of this track, and a linear fade all the way to the beginning of the first verse where the drums kick in. And this is exactly how I sort of manipulate and pre-emphasize my master bus in order to take away some of those dynamics. For me personally, the last thing I want to do as a mixer engineer is start training my brain to be less dynamic. I love mixing big dynamics into tracks. I've just learned as a producer, I have to step in at the end of that project and decide how much of that dynamic range I want to be in the final product. And this is what my responsibility is as a producer. I might think that that track sounds lovely in my studio and that those extra dynamics are just bringing something extra special to that track. But the reality is, many of those subtle bits of things that you're hearing in your studio, they don't translate to the outside world. It's as simple as that. And as much as I love having dynamics in tracks, I like to limit how much dynamics I end up sending out of my studio so that that track translates better to the outside world.
Everything disastrous is pure.
Nice comfortable level on my meter bridge, easily hitting 0 on the VU meters. Well, if I simply turn this automation off that I've got on, and I go back to the intro of this song and hit play, check it. Yeah, the VU meters are barely registering -10, okay? So this is exactly what I believe Pizer's talking about, and something that I've experienced big time in my career is delivering mixes that might have 10 dB of difference between the intro and that chorus or first verse or whatever. And though that might sound amazing in my own studio, I promise you that is not going to translate to the outside world. And this kind of pre-emphasis and manipulation of the master bus, this can be the solution for this problem. But it absolutely has to happen before the limiter. That's the big time rule about this kind of pre-emphasis or manipulation I'm talking about. You can't be doing this after the limiter, or all you're doing is adjusting the output of that limiter. What is much more effective is if you make this manipulation or these changes before the limiter. You know, when I finally understood what that limiter is actually doing to my mix, I stopped destroying my mixes with a limiter. Okay, this is one area that you can crush your mix so quickly. When I add the automation, you can see that I'm boosting this main fader by about 6 dB or something. Yeah, in my own experience, this is a very effective means at controlling my dynamic range. And this is often why you see me setting up my mixes the way I do, always having that additional bus on the way to the master bus. It's exactly why I'm doing this sort of thing, so that I can manipulate and kind of pre-emphasize what I'm sending to my analog chain before it comes back and hits my limiter. You know, I made the mistake earlier on in my career of trying to obtain these results using a limiter only, and that is a huge mistake. Why? Because in order for you to gain 2 dB on the intro of your song, you gotta crush 2 dB more gain in this part of the song that's cranking or rocking, so to speak. I mean, a lot of this stuff could be set up with automation on the limiter itself, but automating the send that's going to the limiter, way more logical for me because, you know, I've got so much more control. Boom, open up a brand new example and you can see I'm right up to the same tricks, going in and manipulating that master bus. In this particular case, it's the Skinny Puppy song, Viruses. We're just gonna check it out instrumentally for a moment. I'm gonna go ahead and play back the automation just as I have it in the mix. Check it. So you can see clearly that there's like a 2 dB difference between the verse and the chorus. I'm not lowering the chorus in that automation. What I've been doing is boosting everything else. I'm gonna go ahead and A-B the middle of the chorus to the middle of the verse. I'm gonna do it with automation first, and then we'll turn the automation off. We'll come back and we'll do that A-B comparison without the automation in place. So let's check it out with first. Okay, now I'll turn the automation off and we'll do the same A-B. Yeah, this is a great example where the middle of the verse, when I have this automation bypassed, or my pre-emphasis, so to speak, I'm hitting maybe -3, maybe -2 on my meter bridge. You know, with the same settings, when I listen to the chorus, you know, I'm hitting +3 on my meter bridge. So as cool as it might sound in my own studio to have a 6 dB difference between the verse and the chorus, I promise you that is not going to translate well to the outside world. And as a producer, it's my job to sort of limit how much of that dynamic range is able to escape my studio. And this is exactly how I do it, by manipulating the master bus before it gets to the limiter. You know, one area of psychoacoustics that I experiment in a lot is this whole idea of, you know, how you're manipulating that sound as a listener. When a mixer or producer gives a substantial boost to, say, the first 4 bars of any given part, very often as a producer or a mixer, you can back that sound down a little bit after the initial introduction of that part. And the human brain will not perceive it as being lowered. This is just a really interesting thing that plays into psychoacoustics. So I could literally sit here and open song after song, and just about every single time we're going to see the very same scenario where I've gone in and kind of manipulated my master bus. Well, thank you very much for sitting in on today's session, and I encourage you to experiment with this whole pre-emphasis on the master idea. It's critically important that that happens before the limiter. So you accomplish that by simply creating another mix bus on the way to your main output, allowing you to introduce automation or plugins or any other kind of manipulation before that limiter. There's no question that this technique is going to help your mixes translate to the outside world in a really good way.